Welcome to Encura's new monthly conversation series on navigating change. I'm Kathleen Larmet, and today's conversation is on the NIH flat rate for indirect cost. We have a lot of material to share with you today, so we will be extending today's program until 3:15 p.m. Questions will be answered throughout the program, so if you have a question, please click on the Q&A icon. The video and slides from today will be posted on the Encura YouTube channel later this week. Joining us today, Mark Barnes. Mark is a partner with Ropes and Gray, a preeminent thinker and advisor to universities, medical centers, healthcare and life sciences companies, and investors. He has extensive experience guiding clients on legal issues related to research with humans and animals, research misconduct and research fraud, stem cell and genetic research, federal research grants and contracts, international research collaborations, and foreign influence, regulations, and data privacy. Welcome, Mark. Next is Mark Davis. Mark is a managing partner at Attain Partners, a founding member of Attain, and leads the Attain research practice. Mark specializes in assisting top research universities and academic medical centers achieve strategic and financial goals and manage risk and regulatory compliance. He has extensive knowledge on a wide range of federal, administrative regulations and cost principles and policies, including the OMB uniform guidance, as well as expertise in federal grant management, compliance, and indirect cost recovery. Welcome, Mark. Next, we have Cindy Hope. Cindy is a dedicated advocate for research institutions and a leader in policy development. As a key figure at COGR, Cindy works tirelessly to address critical issues affecting federally funded research, ensuring that institutions have a voice in policy decisions that impact compliance, funding, and institutional operations. With her deep understanding of federal regulations and institutional challenges, she provides invaluable guidance to the research community. And we have Gil Tran, recognized authority in federal grants management and compliance. Many of you know Gil from his years of service at the Office of Management and Budget, where he played a key role in shaping federal guidance, including the uniform guidance. Now with Attain, he continues to support the research administration community by helping institutions navigate complex regulatory landscapes with clarity and insight. Thanks for joining us, Cindy and Gil. Thank you all for joining us today. And so let's get the conversation started. I'm going to turn this over to Gil.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you, Kathleen. Kathleen, you forget to mention that this is the premiere, the debut of your navigating change. First of your many that I already saw the lineup, and you already got at least two more coming. So, ladies and gentlemen, Cindy, Mark, and Mark, we have to set the standard right here, right? I mean, this is the premiere, out of the box. We have to do a good job here, and we are so glad that we have over 2,900 people sign up for this session. So glad to be here. Ladies and gentlemen, is officially March, and Mark is always famous for March Madness, and we saw what an exciting weekend that we have there. And also, I saw today in the newspaper that for the first time ever, somebody won a $1 million March Madness challenge from Warren Buffett. $1 million, for guessing 31 out of the 32 games correctly. So that's the first time ever. So March Madness already started, but if we are working in research, administrator, PIs, researcher, whatever, our madness start in February and continue, today. So, this is we're talking about the February 7 madness that came out. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and share some slide now, Tara, so make sure it's working okay. But I'm going to get started, kind of tell you the backgrounds and how did we get here from February 7 on that Friday until, March 5th. And I'm going to turn over to Mark Barnes to ask his opinion on more on his comment on what the status of that preliminary injunction. And then I'm going to turn over to Cindy and Mark Davis to talk about implication, impacts, and some guidance. We're going to open for question. Like Kathleen say, if you have a question, go ahead and submit it in the in the Q&A, not the chat, the Q&A, and we monitor that and try to answer them as we go along. We have extended the session from 60 minutes to 75 minutes in order because we anticipate a lot of questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and make sure that is working okay. And okay, somebody let me know when they can see the screen. Ready to go, Mark?
Looks good.
Okay, thank you. So NIH flat rate for indirect costs, and that's what we're talking about, today. Like I say, the program is very simple. This is us, that beautiful picture here, on the screen. So I'm going to talk about the background. How did we get here? Kind of summarize a little bit. We probably all know about what's going on. I'm going to kind of just key out some of the point, some of my observation on it. We're going to talk about, mostly Mark Barnes going to talk about the legal action and where the status of it. And then, like I say, impact, implication, and guidance. All of us going to chime in, and we leave some time for quick Q&A as well. February 7th, Friday night. Everybody, if you are working in research administration, if you're working in a lab, you're working with university, research institute, hospital doing research, foreign organization doing research, you know exactly where you were. I was getting my dinner ready. I was having barbecues, and then my phone just went off the hook. Everybody know where they were on Friday, February 7th. February 8th, you see all this headline here that rolling out right away. So this is a very impactful. Look at down at the bottom. Down at the bottom here, what you see here, NIH budget cut, or the acopolis of American science, experts say. Acopolis, that means total destroyer, right? And it's probably not far-stretched, to call it that. But when I see this, I kind of remind me immediately when I was visiting Japan. In 2018, I was visiting Japan, and one of the things that I was able to see is this painting by Hokusai. Is called the Great Wave of Kanagawa. When you picture that right in front of you, you immediately, the only thing you see there in the painting is that big wave. And that big wave, have this, like the claw-like, the things that kind of swallow up everything. That's the only thing you saw, right away. But if you take a look at closely, you will see three little boats. The three little boats with, men, like rowing away. And they're not rowing away, away from the wave. They are rowing away straight into the wave, try to make it, the other side. That's the feeling I have when I have this news that is that big wave. But as researchers, as administrators, we know that we have to roll through this wave to get the other side. And in all Hokusai printing, you will see that there's always Mount Fuji in the back. That gives us hope. That's the beacons of all the, the Japanese. So the wave is there. We just have to, kind of roll through it. The 4 day that, I'm going to lay it out to you, and actually, one more day they're going to include in there. The NIH policy statement was issued on February 7th, Friday night at 5 o'clock, announced it, the policy to immediately cap the indirect cost rate at 15% for all new award and existing award at university. Immediately, the next business day, 3 lawsuits, was filed, were filed on February 10th, that very Monday. Mark Barnes, with rope and gray, representing, AAMC and actually a couple organizations filed a lawsuit on behalf of all their membership and on behalf of all the grantees. There's a lawsuit from 22 states that was filed on February 10 as well. And there's one lawsuit against the notice from AAU, American Association, AAU, and 2 other council, plus 12 schools, including schools like University of California System, Johns Hopkins, MIT, and Tufts College. So 3 lawsuits was filed. By the end of that day, on February 10, the judge issued a temporary restraining order on 2 of those lawsuits. They did address the lawsuit by AAU, but say that it's because the other lawsuit already have the same issue. They already have a temporary restraining orders. So the next date here, though, in the lawsuit with the temporary restraining orders, they also set a date for the hearings on another Friday, February 21st, a couple weeks from that. Before the hearing can happen, all the 3 plaintiffs, AAU, AAMC, and the state have to submit materials to the law judge, in order to get to the hearing. So the other date I want to throw down, though, is is Friday, February 14th. Friday, 14th, as many of you know, is Valentine's Day. I remember that day too because my wife was asking, "Are we doing anything tonight? For Valentine's? We going out anything?" And I very sadly talked to her, look at her, say, "No, I have to be with the lawyers tonight to prepare this brief that coming in." And we all remember that Mark and I, and others, have to prepare that lawsuit that comes in on your behalf, on all research university behalf. So that was my Valentine's Day. But it turned out very well because the next Friday we have a court hearing that was held on February 21st in Boston. Mark was there. I called in. Mark and I called in. Cindy, you probably called in as well. 2-hour hearing in front of the packed room, where both sides present their case. We present their case. All the 3 lawsuit lawyers was there, from the state, from AAMC, from AAU were there, and they have 1 lawyer, representing, NIH at the court, at the court on February 21st. The last thing that Judge Angel Kelly say at the end of the 2 hours, she say, "I have a lot of work to do," and she does. So she took a while. It's until like a week and a half, after that Judge Angel Kelly on the Wednesday issued a preliminary injunction on March 5th of 2025, a preliminary injunction, meaning it stopped the government from implementing this notice. And just check this out, right? On Ash Wednesday, March 5th, an angel has come and delivered from evils. Have raised us from the ash on Ash Wednesday. I don't know how more romantic Hollywood ending that could be. That's why you see my angels there. When I heard the news, I just say Hallelujah. Somebody has looked over us like that. So okay. So the things that I want to go to you is kind of summarize. You all probably read this, but this is what hit me the most and kind of what kind of related to you. The notice was issued on February 7th on the Friday night, not by your usual opera's office, but the NIH office of the office director. So it's pretty high up. It's not your opera, for extramural research that you issue out thing, and its impact the effective the very next day, according to Judge Angel Kelly. She say, "Wait a minute, it's issued out on 7 and it's effective to 10. Where's the implementation period?" She make that point in the hearing, and it's basically say that they are implementing a standard indirect cost rate in lieu of the negotiated. Separately negotiated rate for indirect costs, meaning that your negotiated rate in your rate agreement that kind of prove what the cost to you to do research is no longer valid. The 60%, the 50%, this 69% so on and so forth is now gone. And for university, it's applied right away for all existing NIH grant. For other type of organization, is applied, for new NIH award. So for some reason, university is being kind of focused, in the implementation there. Also, in the notice, you will see that NIH basically is only a page and a half. It's only a page and a half, but it's very impactful, as you can see. NIH is assert that they have the authority to do all these things. That the deviation is allowed for either class of federal award or single award according, to the uniform guidance, which I'm very, very familiar with. But it's also in their 45 CFR 75-414, which adopt the uniform guidance. So they say, yeah, we have the authority to do this. But also NIH treat the guidance as a publicly available notice, meaning that, by this notice, they let everybody know that, this is going to be the work, the way of the future. The three justifications that they mention, in the notice are indirect costs are difficult for NIH to oversee. University, because they accept grants for private foundation at less than negotiated rate, from the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation, American Cancer Institute, giving a 10 or 15. Therefore, the 15% that we set today actually meaning you are better off even. And then the last one, he say that, they say that, more fund to direct cost. With this action, more fund will be allocated, going to be transferred from overhead to direct. Those are the three reasons. This is what we know. This is not the first time the administration has attempted this. In 1995, Clinton budget, and that's the time that I came in to OMB, and also that was the time that NIH, President Clinton vision was to double size, double the size of NIH, but he didn't want to, just double size the NIH and not taking care of the indirect costs. So in the 1995 budget, he proposed, some study to take a look at trying to bring the rate down. In the 2013 proposal, this is when we were combining all the circular into the uniform guidance. There also a proposal that I remember very well because I was working on the panel for that, is to come up with some kind of flat rate. But the flat rate that we devised too was actually the flat rate by type of research, flat rate by region, and flat rate, by different type of grant. So it's not one flat rate, but many, multi-flat rate. And also the proposal in what we call the ANPG, which means advance notice. So before it gets the proposal, also say that, you can take a 5% discount and keep that rate forever without any documentation. That did not get support of it. So the only thing that came out of that 2013 proposal was the 10% de minimis rate. In 2018, under the first President Trump administration, the NIH proposed a 10% flat rate, 10% of total cost for flat rate of all their award. So another thing that can kind of resonate as well with this notice, though, is you probably heard about Project 2025. And in the Project 2025, there was a proposal in there to capping the rate at the lowest rate accepted by university. So if you accept, a rate from Robert Wood Johnson at 15, your whole rate, should be 15. There's no consideration for real cost for performing research in the guidance. And or you already know right away, overnight. This is overnight. All the article that I flashed to you already cite some of this. First of all, on the same day that the notice came out, the NIH also put on X, on the formerly Twitter on X, this picture here that you saw, how they're gonna save $4 billion effectively immediately, bringing the rate from Harvard from from 69% to 15%, Yale from 67.5 to 15, Johns Hopkins from 63.7 to 15. This is on X. So and NIH already projected out that that they're gonna save some money on it. So another things that you will see that right away, Emory University already calculate over the weekend that they're gonna estimate $140 billion reduction, if they use the 15%. And they'll report that if this happens, them two have to report they're gonna shut down some research lab. Another thing that happened right away on February 9 or 8 or 9, Senator Pat Murray, Washington State, that the cap is illegal under the labor and HHS indication appropriation bill. And I highlight that section there. That was in existence in 2017. So one thing that we did, with the lawsuit that, the brief that Rope and Gray representing AAMC, in response, to this, in response to this notice is estimate what the real impact is, on all this thing. And you saw that NIH kind of estimate that the estimated loss gonna be saving gonna be $4 billion. Ford magazine, say estimate to be 5.5 billion. The New York Times says $5 billion. And Rob and Gray asked us, to compute the cost as well, independent of other things that happen. So we did that as well as submit that, with the lawsuit. And at this point, I'm not sure how many of you have been to Asia, but if you have been to Asia, you will see this exclamation a lot. Same, but different. I think Mark Davis kind of referred to that, already. And when I did this, I don't realize any of other numbers, but I came out and I said, wait a minute, we came up pretty close. And same but different. The way we use it in Asia, in Vietnam, where I come from, is basically this: if you walk into a restaurant and you order a beer bomba, a Michelob Light, and they say no Michelob Light, but beer bomba we have, and they say, how does it taste? They're gonna say same but different. The two beers are same different. I asking my kids, that there are 13 Fast and Furious, movies. How is that? Which one is better? Fast Furious, Too Fast, Too Furious in 2003, or Fast and Furious 10 Part 1 in 2023? And he said, yo, Sam is different, Dad. And the thing is, I heard my aunt one time congratulating her friends and say, Ann, congratulations, I heard you just get married. How's your new husband? And her friend say, oh, same but different. So that's basically same but different. But I would like to kind of lay out to you how we did it, in the Attain methodology. We use the NIH project data, listing out all the 63,000 NIH award. We exclude all the projects that is less than 15% effective rate, knowing that they're not going to jump from 8% to 15%, or those training costs. We convert it into modified total direct cost at 85% of each project, and we apply the 15%, the new rate to the MTDC. That gives us to $6.5 billion annually. In the declaration itself, we also have this chart that you see, kind of listed out, all the losses, by state. Alaska, California receiving $3.7 billion in NIH, going to lose about $1 billion per se. Some of the school this is from that declaration that was submitted, by the lawyers. They say they're going to lose, for example, UMass Chance Medical receiving $200 million NIH. They're going to expect to lose about $40 to $50 million. Emory, you saw before, going to lose about $140 million. University of Washington School of Medicine, they're going to lose about $100 million. And the state of New York, they received $5 billion. NIH going to lose about $850 million. So that's where we at. So now that's where it get to all the backgrounds are there. So now I'm gonna get to the legal action and status. Mark, I have about
Gil,
I,
before we move along, there was a question in the chat I think we should address now.
please do.
Sure. The question was whether the 15% is applied to total direct cost or modified to total direct cost. And I understand your reasons for using modified total direct cost in your estimates. I support that. I think we want to understand what the highest potential impact would be. But I also feel the need to point out that within the notice itself, they are mixing lots of apples and oranges and potatoes and, carburetors. I don't know, so it, if this ever comes to pass, which I hope we never have to find out, I would argue that, they say the average indirect cost rate reported by NIH has averaged between 27 and 28% over time. Well, that's total cost. That's the entire award amount. And then they go on to say, but many organizations charge higher than that, even up to 60. So, the 60 would be an MTDC rate, and they're comparing that to a total cost. So I think the answer to the question is we don't know for sure. You need to think about it, for purposes of your institution estimating what the impact might be. And the most conservative approach would be MTDC.
Yeah, Cindy, you're so right. Thank you for addressing that, because there's all kind of interpretation about it, and they all right, because you can also, another thing, you can compare with what they tried to do in 2017. They tried to cap at 10% of total cost. So there are reason of that, but also there's a reading that is this 15% going to be in lieu of your negotiated rate, and your negotiated rate is usually MTDC. As a matter of fact, somebody asked me, the other day, say, Gil, do you think this notice is prepared by AI? It's like the missing, like you say, apples and potatoes, together, and maybe it was prepared by AI. So some facts are true and some facts are not.
Yeah, a related question was to explain what Attain meant by converting 85%. And I think that also has to do with trying to estimate MTDC, right?
Right. That's exactly how we did it. The 85% is basically the NIH database have the total cost, and they break it down between total direct cost and indirect cost. So you cannot take the total direct cost, because this include all kind of items that should be excluded from MTDC. So that's you're exactly 85%. We just kind of estimate it based on our experience working with other schools that MTDC usually, if you take out the equipment, if you take it out the Civil War, if you take out the participant support cost, you come up to the 85. Thank you, Carrie. Anything else? That's it? Okay. So legal action and status. I'm going to have a few slides here, and then I'm going to turn over to Mark Barnes, for his, insight, on what happened and what you think going to happen, what happened next. So on March 5th, and Mark Barnes predicted exactly right after the hearing that we have on February 21st. We asked Mark, when you think Judge Angel Kelly is going to come out with her wonderful decision, and he said, well, it won't be next week, it won't be 2 pages, it's going to be a little bit more than that, and he was exactly on the dot. So it took more than a week, and so the document came out to be 76 pages. I have to say, I read it back and forth. It was a wonderful written opinion. It's basically take care of discussing all the points that was presented in the hearings, and also taking all the points that were presented in the brief by both sides, by all the 3 lawsuits. Remember, I say the AAU, the judge didn't consider it, but she included all all the declaration on in the AAU as well. I'm just going to have like 3 slides on here, in my opinion, observation on the lawsuit. And the thing that jumped out to me right away, and it's probably for your lawyers, you know this already, that in order to issue a preliminary injunction from a temporary restraining order, you have to satisfy these 4 conditions right here that you see on this slide. It have to be that your reason have to be, you have to have a likelihood of succeed on merit. It have to have a high likelihood of irreparable harm if injunction relief is not granted. There's have to be a balance of equity tip in favor of the plaintiff, and the injunction relief, in the public relief, is in the public interest. And Judge Angel Kelly even say that she valued the most the number one that, that in all the point that presented by, the lawyer on both sides, who going to be mostly likely to succeed on the merit itself. So by the way, I give you the links there where, all the activity, from that court, is being displayed, including, her final suit. My observation, because, she pointed out the most important for her is the substantial likelihood of succeed, and she valued both sides, and basically say that the rate change notice violate all the rules, the uniform guidance rules, the NIH, own rules. The notice is contrary to the law, and the notice failed to follow what we call the APA Procedure Act, which we require comments and notice before you have any type of substantive leave. I'm going to lay out to you one more thing there, because this is important, how she kind of say that this whole notice is in violation of the rules, for deviation requirement. As you see in the uniform guidance requirement for deviation, you have 4 requirements you have to satisfy. You have to have the deviation can only be applied to a class of federal award or single federal award, have to be approved by the federal award agency head or delegate. That was revised in 2024, so the agency do not have to do that anymore. They have to have a notification of OMB. I'm not sure they have done that. They have to make it publicly available justification for deviation. They mentioned that notice was publicly available as justification. They just say, no, that's definitely not enough. And the thing is, it's also have to be included in the NOFO, the notice of funding opportunity. So when you sign up to an agreement, you know what your rate, is going to be. So I think Judge Angel Kelly in her very strong words say that, the notice violate, all this. The only things that I think the government have a chance on winning is the last one. HHS waiver, on the fail to follow the APA Administrative Procedures Act. In that, anything have to be, any substantive rule have to be out, for proposal and comment. And HHS elect to do that. That the grant is exempted, but HHS elect to do that process since 1971. Guess what? On March 3rd of 2025, on Monday, before the preliminary injunction was issued, HHS has said, okay, we're not going to play that rules anymore for our grant benefit or contract. So I think that's maybe one point that if they want to redo this thing, that's one point that they say, okay, well, now we don't have to follow the whole thing. One last slide here I'm going to show to you, and then this thing, I think this is the one that I think that really lay heavily, on the side of the university, is the balance of equity and public interest. And this is, I just have the whole thing verbatim, on there, because I think that her argument for having preliminary injunction lay heavily in what we say here, that without a preliminary injunction, they're going to be, the hardship going to be substantial, resulting in loss of life for all those relying on clinical trials. They're going to be resulting in death of animals that present years of research, degradation of infrastructure, and the loss of staff are central to patient care and research activity, brain drains in the healthcare industry and delay and potential suspension of future grants. I think this is, in my opinion, is come at page 67 towards the end, but she laid her strongest opinion on why she issued a preliminary injunction. So Mark Barnes, with that, I'm going to turn over to you to get a little bit of your insights on the opinions, and could be too, so this is the preliminary injunction. What does that mean? It's preliminary and not permanent. What does that mean? What is the next level for appeal, Supreme Court? I'm going to turn over to you, Mark.
Thank you very much, Gil. Thank you for the great summary here of what's happened so far and some of the issues here. We did achieve the opinion, as Gil said, from Judge Kelly, that gives us what's called a preliminary injunction. And the preliminary injunction in many lawsuits, just so that folks who are not lawyers know, the issuance of a preliminary injunction after the issuance, as happened here, of a temporary restraining order, is often dispositive of what happens, of what the decision is at the baseline court level, which in this case is the U.S. District Court for Massachusetts. It's in federal court because they're obviously federal issues here. And so what will likely happen here is not that we will have a big trial on this at the district court, federal district court of Massachusetts. What is likely going to happen, and I'll spare you the legal details of this, is that the government, we understand, or at least our intuition is that they are planning to appeal, and the appeal of that would go to the circuit court of appeals, the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. And I'm sorry, I'm thinking of New York, the First Circuit Court of Appeals, which covers Massachusetts. And then it would be decided by the appeals court. So it is unlikely that very unlikely, I think, that the government is going to move to, is going to ask Judge Kelly, for example, to reconsider the issuance of a preliminary injunction. It's much more likely they're going to appeal, and then the circuit court would rule on it, and then there is the possibility that either the government or the plaintiffs here, which would be the 22 attorneys general and AAMC and AAU and several other organizations like the Committee of Boston Teaching Hospitals and the Public Health Schools Association and others would choose to appeal. It's going to take a while for these appeals to work out. I think that I think the government is. It seems to us as though the signals are that the government is going to appeal to the circuit court level, the federal circuit court level. I think what is another possibility, and I'm not saying anything that the government doesn't well know and that Gil hasn't already talked about, which is that, Gil, if you'll go back one slide on this to the you see the last bullet point on the right, HHS waiver 1971 and reversal on March 3rd. This is important because in the middle of all this happening, remember the issuance on February 7th of this new IDC rate that was supposed to be imposed immediately on colleges and universities. And then February 10th, on Monday, February 10th, we were able to get the temporary restraining order. So why is this important? This is important because the regulations that in 45 CFR that govern the IDC rate and the calculation, the way in which the periodicity with which it's renegotiated, et cetera, those are in they're in regulations. And in general, in order for the federal government to change a regulation, it's got to go through the Administrative Procedure Act, which means a notice and comment, and it gets all the comments from the interested parties. It has to respond, consider reasonably the comments, and respond to the comments before issuing a final change in a rule or the issuance of a brand new rule. In 1971, I think it was Elliot Richardson was Nixon's APW secretary. Elliot Richardson, and under his watch, HHS agreed that even though it didn't have to submit grant-related and contract-related issues it didn't need to create rules for grants and contracts from HEW, which includes, of course, NIH, through the Administrative Procedure Act process. It was not required to, but it said under the so-called Richardson waiver, we are waiving our rights under the APA so that we will actually use the notice and comment period. We will impose on ourselves the obligation of issuing our certain parts of our regulatory structure under the Administrative Procedure Act, which means that which requires a slow and a careful and deliberative process. That was a voluntary imposition, self-imposition of this requirement. On March 3rd, shortly after all of this happened, so just 4 weeks, 3 weeks after all of the events happened on February 7th and February 10th, and HHS, formerly HEW, reversed that and said, we are abandoning the self-imposition of the APA requirements on how we handle rules and regulations related to grants and contracts. So what this does is that they were allowed to do that, we think, although one could make legal arguments about that, and I'm sure we will if we have to. But what this means is that the government could, even though its hand was slapped, I think it's fair to say, in the issuance of the TRO and then the preliminary injunction, the government could come back and simply change the rules and would not need to go through, at least the government would argue, they don't need to go through the Administrative Procedure Act process. So we're not out of so no matter what's appealed or what's not appealed, we're not out of the woods because the federal government has latitude here, and latitude that it took on itself. And then, of course, there are two other things to mention in terms of where this is all going. One is that there are still rate negotiations going on, and you should all negotiate heartily and robustly for your rates, in my opinion, because we don't know where this is going, and you don't want to just stop negotiating. You want to, we may retain this structure, whatever. But I think in the negotiation process, we have to anticipate that the government is going to be tougher than they were before in the negotiations. And Cindy can probably, and Mark can probably comment on that. And so we're not out of the, even if this existing effort were abandoned to impose a flat rate, there are other ways the government could save money. And then the final thing I'll say, and then I'll turn it over to whoever's next. I guess I don't know if it's Mark or Cindy, but it's also it's important to recognize that that we just don't know, as I said, where this is all going. So one thing that I would encourage everyone to do very carefully is to make sure that when you're negotiating your rate, when you are drawing down funds for grants, when you are doing anything, just be aware that this is a more robust administration for enforcement of all the rules. And so, of course, we all followed the rules before, but I would just make triply sure that I followed the rules here. I would make sure that my rate proposals, for example, were so ironclad and so airtight that they could withstand the most exacting of regulatory scrutiny. And I'll stop there, Gil.
So, Mark, thank you. One follow-up question on what you say. One question that comes in. Given how often the Trump administration tried to jump over appeal court and go straight to the Supreme Court, what is the likelihood of that Supreme Court would remove the injunction? What remedy exists if they try to do that? What's your thought on that? I think you kind of alluded a little bit. You kind of predict.
I mean, anything can happen in this world. That's what we've learned. If we didn't know that before, we certainly learned it. But I doubt that the Supreme Court is going to do that, because this is the IDC structure is not the world gone awry. It's been in place for a long time. It's been recognized by everybody, including in the existing appropriations bill that's in effect right now, and which actually says, as Gil said, it says in the appropriation language, do not touch. Yeah. Instructs HHS do not touch the existing indirect cost rate. It's a little more complicated than that, but that's basically what it says. So I just, if this were the administration basically undoing something that had just happened in the Biden administration,
Mhm.
maybe so, and I'm just handicapping this politically, not legally. But, but given that all this order does, the existing order from Judge Kelly does, is keep in place that which has been in place for decades. I think that we're going to go through if the government wants to appeal, we're going to go through an orderly appeals process. That would be my prediction.
And also, Mark, did you say that the government have 90 days to appeal the preliminary injunction?
Yes,
Okay,
that's right.
that's good. So, I mean, I heard on another case now that so the next phase, if they go to appeal, and the judge rule in favor of the government, then it's going to be what you call an administrative stay. Is that what the next phase is going to be if we go to appeal court? And if
the appeal court certainly government could ask the appeals court to relax or lift the preliminary injunction
okay.
as the case pens, but look, we have no idea, but I think that the best thing that we can do right now is soldier on, doing what we've been doing for decades, doing it more carefully perhaps than we ever did it before in our lives, but just soldier on. And when it changes, when it changes, we'll know it's changing, and we'll deal with that. And there is going to be look, we all know there is pressure for cost compression in Washington. Although one interesting thing about this is that at first the government said, we're doing this 15% in order to save money. At the hearing on the preliminary injunction, the government said, oh, we're not here to save money. We just want to save money on administrative expenses, and we want to be able to take all that money that's saved and fund new research. So the government has said both things.
Okay, great.
Okay.
So, Cindy, I'm going to turn over to you and Mark Davis to start, with the impact, implication, and guidance. But I see two questions, in the pipe that I'm going to go ahead and answer. One of them is, what is cost allocation services at HHS doing with rate proposal in process? And the answer is because of a preliminary injunction that was issued by Judge Angel Kelly, they are resuming the rate reviews. They were stopping at when this notice came out on February 7th. They definitely have a stop, because if this is effective, then they are going to be required to issue, new rate agreement with the 15% for NIH. By the way, NIH only, and not all the HHS. So if this really happened, the NIH award going to be 15%, but the CDC, the FDA, the National Cancer Institute still going to have the negotiated rate. So anyway, at that time, cost allocation told us that they pausing all the rate review process, but because since March 1st, we have confirmed with them that they are resuming all the reviews. So like Mark Barnes have said, do submit your proposal, make sure is tight, but cost allocation is business as usual for them.
And
the other question,
Gil, I would add, they are issuing rate agreements.
Yeah.
As part of this process.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, we were worried a little bit, Mark Davis, that they not, because in the process of stopping reviewing issue rate agreement, they stopping the fringe benefit, who got nothing to do with with this thing.
Yeah.
And some university was would be in chaos for that. So the other question before I turn over to you, Cindy, is, could this 15% limit be put in the new federal budget, assuming they ever pass one? And that's a possibility. They have tried before, and Congress say no. That we don't like it. And in addition, we're going to put language in there in 2017 that the HHS is not going to be messing around with any deviation from the current rule process that is set in the uniform guidance. But they may try it again. They have done it before. They may have the support of Congress, to have something like this in the budget. So that's a possibility that may happen.
Yeah, I'm gonna talk a little bit about that, Gil, but before we move on to that, I think there's a really good question in here for Mark Barnes, and you may not know, I apologize for putting you on the spot, but like why do you think they started with NIH with this grants policy notice instead of doing something broader like an executive order that would have applied to NSF and NASA and everybody?
I don't know. I can speculate if you want me to, Cindy, but again, it's political speculation, not legal speculation. I don't think there was a special legality about this, or a sort of a better legal option at NIH. I think it's that the NIH grant system has attracted a lot of attention because A, it's the biggest funder, as you know, of colleges, universities, and academic medical center grants, and B, the administration has really focused on NIH because of the gender affirming care grants, what this administration has called the gender ideology grants. They focused on vaccine promotion grants, that is grants to study why there's not better uptake of vaccines by the larger population or by subpopulations, and they focused a lot on these health economics grants that focus on health inequities, and structural racism is the term that's sometimes used. And that stuff was much more coming out of NIH than it was out of NASA or NSF or anybody else. I think that explains why they focused on all those things together. So much money, such support for colleges and university research, and the quality, the subject matter of some of the grants coming out of NIH.
Thank you.
And I would say I would ask Cindy that they all also have the experience or the history of capping the NIH grant at 10%, during the last administration. So and NIH kind of they have tried this road before. They just went a little bit further on, rather than put in a budget. Why don't we try the notice with the same concept, and this also followed the Project 2025 in terms of maybe we should take a look at a standard rate to kind of parallel or what university accept from the other private. So I thought that maybe that's why they asked to do NIH. And by the way, it's another question on here that is are the other agency going to follow the same the same example and cap the rate as well? And there's a possibility there. In my experience at OMB, because the funds are coming from different appropriation, they usually don't act collectively doing the same thing. So for example, Department of Defense come from another appropriation, Department of Energy come from the appropriation. They don't usually follow the same policy. And my experience too, with Department of Defense, they usually allow full reimbursement of all the costs incurred for their projects. Cindy, I'm gonna turn over to you first,
right,
in terms of your thought on the impact, implication, and guidance, and you can address any of the pre-award, post-award, or indirect.
I will do my best not to just make this a rant. I will start with I'm going to start with impact, and I'll leave the potential impact of the 15% cap to Mark, Davis, and you, but there's an actual impact right now. It's a proven economic fact that the absolute worst thing for business is uncertainty. And, Gil, when we talked about this at the Incura FRA conference last week, we shared some results from a COGR survey that we did a few weeks ago. And, this was at the end of February, and there weren't that many terminated awards or, and obviously at that point we, well, it was before the injunction, but we had the other thing before that. But, even with that, with nothing real right in front of us, we see all the uncertainty. Nobody knows what's going to happen next year. We don't even know what's going to happen this Friday. Things are just changing so quickly that there's no way to adequately plan. So we saw, even at the end of February, institutions with hiring freezes and travel freezes and limiting recruitment of graduate students and new faculty. So, I've equated this to what happens with the tariffs. They're on one day, when they're off the next, the stock market doesn't immediately recover because we don't know what's going to happen the next week, and so it's the same with this. I think a lot of damage has already been done to institutions of higher education and other research institutions because of that. And, COGR doesn't lobby, but we work very closely with a lot of the associations that do AAU, APLU, AAMC, and others. And we meet, we were meeting every other week. We meet weekly now just to talk about F&A. And, the good news is that that language in section 224 that you talked about earlier, Gil, that
Mhm.
protects the NIH and indirect cost rate, that's still there. The continuing resolution that got passed, didn't touch that. And in fact, there was some language that seemed to support that. The bad news is, that we're hearing that Congress is saying, look, this is a mess. This can't be right. How these rates don't make any sense. They're not transparent. But we are also hearing from our, home states that a 15% flat rate is disastrous. What are you going to do? How can we fix this? So, I encourage everyone, not to get ahead of ourselves and and do things that would cause us to start negotiating against ourselves. I don't think we are at a point that we want to be going and making offers to the government that, well, we won't take 15, but how about 30? It's not the right time for that, and there needs to be a lot more community discussion around how we can have a system that's transparent, that recognizes differences in the cost of different institutions based on where they're located, the type of research they're engaged in. And, to be honest, I read a paper over the weekend by an economist who's doing this, will come out shortly, has done research on this. And it was interesting that the conclusions in that paper were very similar to the ones in COGR's 2019 paper on this, which is, here's some alternatives, but every one of them has negatives that are just as bad as the current system or worse. So, maybe it is about transparency. Mark Barnes suggested making sure your F&A rate proposals clean and tight and documented. When we as institutions rose further and further above that administrative cap that universities have, I think we got a little less tight on reviewing those pools, those cost pools, because it didn't, if you're 5 points over the cap, that's not really an area of risk. But maybe we need to do more of that. I'm being asked about COGR survey data on the components of the rate. I could see a day when institutions are not only putting their F&A rate agreement on their website, I could see those in a central database and with those components carved out. And I could see then that being audited beyond what CAS and O&R do in their processes. One last thing, and then I'll let others talk. But one of the things in that notice that really bothered me was that it said that indirect costs are difficult for NIH to oversee. And I'm like, well, that's why we have HHS cost allocation services and the O&R indirect cost branch and other offices. That it's not NIH's problem. It's not their responsibility to oversee these. And so it's just, you know, I would like for there to be more visibility into the process. And so I encourage everyone to educate, inform, and repeat. I believe you probably at the end of the slides, Gil, have some resources for our audience. And, you know, I know the COGR and the other association websites have lots of tools that you can use for educating. You know, I pointed out that the NIH notice compares apples and potatoes. There's a graph on COGR's website that does a really good job of showing the difference between an MTDC negotiated rate and a total cost of the award. And also, if you want to follow me on LinkedIn, it's there. And I always post COGR and other resources there. So I'll stop now.
Okay, Mark Davis, you wanna address that, or?
I will, I will, you know, picking up on some of Cindy's commentary and Mark Barnes and Gil, I would, I was thinking the same thing. It is a time of uncertainty. And there's a lot of uncertainty. You know, we work with a lot of universities around the country, and in discussions with them, there is concern. So, you know, indirect costs are real, and universities invest a lot of resources and a lot of effort into preparing indirect cost proposals and negotiating rates. And I think overall it's done very, very well. But I think we're at a time now, and the term's been thrown out there, but take a look at how you're preparing your indirect cost proposal. What are the allocation methodologies? Because as we live in a time of uncertainty, the reviews might get tougher. They probably will get tougher. With the pressures that we're seeing right now and the uncertainty of the direction here, and certainly cost allocation services, O&R, they can pick up the steps here and make that process tougher. And it'll be incumbent upon the organization to support their cost allocation. So now's a good time to do that. If history repeats itself, for those of us who were around in the 20th century, and I was one of those individuals back in the 1990s when 821 was going through a reform process, which took a number of years to do. There were audits and there were scrub audits, and universities were encouraged, and they did a lot of self-assessment on how their indirect costs were prepared and calculated. So it's an important process. The other thing that is coming up in conversations too. Remember, you have what is your true calculated indirect cost rate? You know, uncapped. That's a real number. That's your real cost compared to your negotiated rate. That's a different. And then what is your effective rate? Because we're seeing a lot of questions and interest in understanding what is the difference in what makes that effective rate, and what are the costs driving that, and can that be improved? I think the community, it's also a time to be proactive and look how we can better document and recover costs. So those are some ideas. Gil, I'll hand it back over to you.
Sounds good, Mark. And I think, Tara, I think we have 10 minutes. So why don't we turn into, the Q&As? We have a lot, in the line. So please submit your Q&As, online. I'm going to start with a couples that I see online, answer it, and then turn over to Mark Barnes, Mark Davis, and Cindy, see if you want to answer, a couple, as well. One of the question here is, has Bhattacharya, Dr. J. Bhattacharya, who just got confirmed yesterday, discussed this publicly or privately? And what do we know? There are reports that he's at NIH today with Doge everywhere in building, causing problems. So the only thing I know, and yes, he did get confirmed. The only thing I know is that when at his hearing, the senator pressed him on his plan for the cap on indirect costs on these very issues, but he would not address them, and say, instead of saying there's a lot of distrust about where that money goes, because the trust of the public health establishment had collapsed since the pandemic. That's what he told the Senate panel. So I agree with Mark, and say that, hey, they seem to think that, they don't know where the money goes. They're supposed, that talk about this being a bloat, that money is not necessary. So that's his opinion on record. So that's mean that he's gonna somehow pay attention on that as well. And I have another question here. Did DOD used to be capped at 30%, 35% total direct cost or thereabout, as headed by Senator Murtha? It reverted to back negotiate rate after he passed, and that's the truth. And that was that's all DOD grants only, though. Like I say, all the appropriation are kind of like, they have their own stovepipe. So it did happen that the 35% of Cindy total direct cost, right? Not MTDC. It happened for a little while. I know that the grant people, at O&R were not happy about that, but I think it's lasted maybe 1 or 2 years, and that was it. So those are the two questions. Anybody else want to address the question in the pipe?
Gil, can I just add to your answer about Jay Bhattacharya?
Yes.
I just want to say this. I know him a little bit. I know
okay.
a good bit, and I know his scholarship as well. And he is, the fact that Jay Bhattacharya is there and that he got confirmed gives me hope about all of these issues, not just the indirect cost rate, but also the grant termination issues that we know are going on. He is a scientist. He knows how we all and the scientists among us and the academics among us work. He's a reasonable person. He's a well-meaning person. And so I have to, we've got a lot of questions from universities and colleges who've received the various grant termination notices. This is not about the IDC, it's about the grant termination notices. And they said, is there any hope? Why are we even bothering to appeal anything? And I say, look, Jay Bhattacharya is coming in. He's going to assemble his own staff. They're going to be people. He's a smart guy. He's going to assemble staff who know what they're doing. So you need to expect that when you write your appeals of your grant terminations, somebody who knows what they're doing ultimately is going to read this stuff. So, you need to carry on. We all need to carry on and do our best, and don't despair.
Okay.
There's a question that says, what are the, actual implications or guidance for pre-award and post-award? And I think we've talked about it a little bit for post-award in terms of the proposal, but just in, day-to-day putting together proposal budgets and doing your accounting, I would encourage you, first of all, to look at what direct cost you are not charging as direct cost. I think over my whole entire many years in this, when I've asked, why is the PI only charging a month in the summer when we know they're working on it all year? It's because, well, the school already is paying for that salary, so we don't want to, put that in. We'd rather use that money for graduate students and postdocs. Well, that sounds great. That's nice of us, but we may not be able to afford to do that anymore. What about, your service centers that you heavily subsidize because you say, oh, well, no one could afford to pay $50 an hour to use that instrument. Well, it costs 75. You know, we may not be able to afford to only charge 20. I think there's a lot of direct costs that we already are not charging as direct cost and that we need to be thinking about our budget processes and policies. And then in terms of indirects, I know there's, a lot of people's minds went straight to, well, if we're capped on the indirects, are there more normally indirects that we could charge as direct? I would say put that on the back burner. I'm not saying it's not a possibility. Maybe if you've got an indirect cost rate you're putting together, think about, are there things that we'd rather not include as indirect because maybe they're in the administrative pools and we know we're not gonna, get anything out of those anyway, and there might be an opportunity down the road to direct charge. But don't start trying to switch out. There are still rules around moving things from direct and indirect and from uncapped or from capped to uncapped. So I just say start with the simple and work your way down as you're thinking about how to prepare.
Okay. We have 5 minutes, ladies and gentlemen. So closing remark. I'm gonna start a minute and a half to each one of us. I'm gonna start from the bottom. Mark Davis, Mark Bond, Cindy, and then I'm gonna close it out. Mark Davis, your closing remark.
We've covered a lot of ground today.
Your closing argument.
My closing argument, my closing encouragement.
There you go.
Hang in there. These are tough times here. Not and I think maybe the theme today has been around the uncertainty, but as we've talked about, pay attention to your cost structures. Cindy made a good comment or point just, a minute ago, and look, there's big impact with the biggest cost is labor costs. So take a look at your cost sharing.
Okay. Mark Bonds.
Well, thank you. Thanks, Mark. Thanks, Gil. Look, I would just say that I think that there's a big crowd here. You have a strong organization in Cura. There are other strong organizations like AAMC, COGR, AAU, and the Public Health School Association, the Nursing School Association, Dental School Association. Work through these organizations, and I'm old enough that I have lived through a turnover in regime from November of 1994 to the convening of the Congress with the Gingrich majority in January of 1995. And I was a lobbyist then. I was the head of the main AIDS lobbying group in Washington during that time. Everyone thought that the AIDS funding was going to go to hell in a handbasket during that time, but it didn't. And the reason it didn't is because we, as lobbyists, and I was a real lobbyist then, I wasn't just sharing information, I was lobbying. And when I was lobbying, we found links to Republican members of the House and the Senate. We figured out how their families and their close friends had been affected by the HIV/AIDS epidemic, and we went to their offices with those people whom they knew, and we explained why the AIDS funding was very important, just as a humanitarian, not as a political issue, but as a humanitarian issue. I think the same thing is what needs to be done here. We're going to all need to educate our elected representatives, use your organizations, use the entity that employs you, work with them, share information, explain that indirect cost is not fluff. It's not the icing on the cake. It is, in fact, what it costs us to do important scientific, medical, biomedical research. Then there's a way out of this. It may not be perfect. There's going to be cost compression, but there's a way, there's a light at the end of the tunnel.
Thanks, Mark. Cindy?
So I've already said a lot, so I'll just say yes to what Mark Burns said. Educate, inform, not just about F&A, but also about the value of basic research.
Yeah. Thanks, Cindy. So I'm gonna close out my 1.5 minute here, and then maybe Kathleen, you can come on last there. I would say that, a few years back, I have the nice opportunity to talk to NIH, doing my uniform guidance, training period. And before I went to NIH, I did a little survey, and I'm not surprised, but I saw that NIH have funded over the year 174 Nobel Prize winner. 174. If you check their history, every year they have somebody in winning the Nobel Prize, at one of those scientific disciplines. And doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from research. All the things that you do out there now are the one producing those Nobel Prize. So research is important work, and it has achieved a whole lot. So keep on doing it. Keep on supporting research, the work that we do out there. And the second thing about exactly about indirect costs, though, is I remember in 2018, my friend Dale Bell, who is now, leading the HHS, was testifying in front of Congress about indirect costs that relate to that whole, deviation things. And Dale Bell's my hero, my friend and my hero. And he say in front of the court 3 times how sexy, indirect cost is. We want to bring sexy back, he say, into indirect costs. And I think we too have to do something like that. But this time, sexy, in my opinion, the S have to stand for simples. The E is easy to understand. The X is extra transparent, and the Y is why not now. So if we can bring it all back, maybe, we can educate Congress, and stuff like that in terms of how important indirect cost to research, and then keep research going. So with that, I want to thank everybody, especially Cindy, Mark, and Mark for joining, on this panel. Thank you for Ancora, for having this session. And I hope that we set the standard here for the whole navigating change, session for Ancora. So I turn over, and thank you all of you for attending the session today. Kathleen?
Thank you, Gil, Cindy, Mark, and Mark. And yes, I think you set a high bar. So we'll see what happens next. We will be back next month, April 14th at 2 p.m. Eastern, when we talk about what comes next, planning for successful change in research administration. And joining us for that conversation at 2 p.m. Eastern will be Cheryl Anderson from UT Southwestern Medical Center, Jennifer Ponting from the University of Chicago, and Ara Tamasian from Harvard University. Thank you all for joining us, and we hope to see you next month.
Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thanks.